world of YouTube, and welcome to a list video that I admittedly wanted to do earlier this week, but I also took a vacation and wanted to relax a little bit. It was my birthday this week, and to celebrate my birthday, I wanted to do a list video on my favorite albums of 1982, because I already did 1992, and I already did 2002, and I'm not going to redo 2012 or 2022, but 1982 is admittedly not my favorite year in the 80s, but it at least gives me a chance to look back 10 years before I was born and look at the music of the time. There are some classics, some essential 80s records dropped in 82 across the board. But even in some of those instances, those records are not my favorite records in that respective artist's discography. Either way, this list was fun to work on for a while, and part of the reason why I was dedicated to knocking it out this week is because I have been spinning a lot of records from 82, and it's honestly been fun. So leave it a like if you're excited, and let's go ahead and talk about these albums, starting with
Watch out, boy, she'll chew you up. Oh, here she comes.
There were a couple records I was tossing to put on the bottom of the list from popular 80s acts, and I ended up landing with H2O by Daryl Hall and John Oates here because it's a solid enough record in its own regard. It's not my favorite of their synth area. I definitely like records like Private Eyes a bit more, but I think that there's some great bombast, and there's some good catchy moments on here, like Maneater, obviously, that was the big hit from this, but I also love the sleekiness on Art of Heartbreak, and I enjoy the build throughout At Tension. You know, I also think that like some of the ambient stuff like Family Man I think is still pretty interesting. And I like where they kind of take their direction on pockets of this and how they expand on some of the synth era stuff. There's other bands doing synth stuff that lands higher for very apt reasons, but this, from these guys, they've done worse, and I also think they've done better, but it's alright. It's alright.
More than that.
I'm not really familiar with Roxy Music, and I had decided to, and when I decided to do this video, I had seen Avalon crop up on this list of like the best albums of 82. That stood out amongst records that I already knew. And then when looking into Roxy Music a bit and seeing, you know, the history of their roster and seeing that this is their last album, I thought it would be an interesting jumping on point, but I made it that nonetheless. You know, I'd seen a lot of people hail the legacy of this record, or like what this record sort of helped set up as far as crafting a niche within the 80s zeitgeist. And I can definitely see that in some regards, you know. Not only through helping accent the sort of reverb-soaked tangent that was building within the synth sphere, like on the single More Than This, which I think is this personal feeling but grand, just smooth pop jam. But also tracks like India, with how the percussion and the atmosphere sort of is pulled together on that. I can understand where it sort of helped inspire parts of the 80s. And I liked this. I thought this was a really cool record. I want to get more into Roxy Music, and I think that, like, this, I'm curious to see where this will sit with me once I've sat with more of their music. But as far as, like, having a good balance of mood and writing some great euphoric pop jams while maintaining this very reverb-soaked atmosphere through and through, I think it's just pulled together pretty fucking swell on here. The jump between H2O and this is kind of grand when it came to, like, spinning a lot from 82. There was a definitive, like, chunk of records I thought were fantastic, and there was, like, some that were, like, there's gonna be some filling out the bottom of the list, and at least one did. I do like H2O again, but this Avalon is a special fucking record, and I definitely, I appreciate this. I appreciate what this has going on. Something else I did while doing this 1982 dive was focus more on my love of Japanese city pop, and I spun a handful of highly regarded records from this year. Friday Magic happened to be one of a couple that ended up on here. Friday Magic, I know because of Fantasy, the opening track, it's a very popularly used city pop song in internet videos. But I think that a lot of this record is also as good as that track is in a big way, whether it be arrangements and just bombast behind tracks like Gigolo, or Pearl No Manicure. Friday Magic is another track that has some fun horn play as well. This record is so catchy as well. Some great hooks. Like Fantasy's great hook, I think Coconuts no Karamoe has a strong hook as well. A really good refrain that crops up on that track. As a whole, I think that this is more than just its notable tracks, and I think that like if you enjoy city pop, I think that this is a great entry point, because there's some other stuff that I like above this, or that had other songs that I like more than some of the stuff on here, but it's because it kind of dives into some of the more like jazz influence, or at least more broadly, you know, jam style, than just some of the more refined pop driven stuff that's here. But the poppy stuff that's here that leans into the more city part of city pop, I think is still fucking great, and there's some great lushness and just great use of that, again, atmospheric reverb that I think still creates a really good experience for the listener.
This is my private life. I've got no friends to fear.
Oingo Boingo's sophomore outing, doing a deeper dive into the more obtuse ideas and further diving into a more insular sort of lyrical tapestry that dips into like the paranoia and like very outcastish approach. The sonic tapestry behind it sort of melting into its own frenzied, frayed ideas that still get reined together to create this great listening experience, I think is a feat to the group, to the group's talents, and I think to their strong musical unity. I think that there is some great musical ideas sort of done on here, and I think that them expanding on their sound, I think is pretty great. Very much is at points as unhinged as the creature on the cover would make you to believe. I think that it's a really fun expansion on some of the ideas that New Wave was burgeoning out from as well, and I think that as far as like creating a, you know, sidestep in the genre, I think that it's a cool tangent, and I think that it is very much also worth the hype in a lot of regards. Admittedly, this is not my first time diving into 1982 music, and I say that knowing that I did skip out on some classics like Avalon and some of the stuff that I'll talk about even above this record, but I got into XTC prior to doing this dive, and when diving deeper into music from the 80s, I did pick up more from bands that I may not have given a full chance like them. And English Settlement, I think, is a classic. You know, it may not be my favorite record for them like a record like H2O, but I still think as far as, like, being a pivot point for the band into trying to focus more on accessibility to some caliber, they don't lose any of their quirkiness in some regards, and I think, honestly, sort of blend some of their, you know, more acoustic ideas or more eccentric or more catchy ideas with some of the more off-kilter approach to song composition that they've done in the past. You know, they also keep some of that sharp or some catty songwriting, like on Ball and Chain and on Fly on the Wall, which have their own sort of political satire and sort of metaphor spinning throughout that, while also keeping that eccentricity a little more of the focal point, like on Jason and the Argonauts, or throughout some of the sonic melding on, like, It's Nearly Africa, or on Melt the Guns. You know, I also think that they do write some catchy-ass jams like Senses Working Overtime. I think this record is phenomenal, and I think that as far as, like, bands making a pivot point, there have absolutely been worse. And I think that it was interesting, honestly, for me at the time to listen to this record, because I got into XTC after this point, and I think that seeing the genesis of some of that more change in philosophy was sort of interesting then, and I still think it's interesting now, just to a lesser degree, because it does have some just choice tracks across the board. You know, they may be strange old men now, but the Misfits' debut, Walk Among Us, is a great proof of concept for what this band had going on as a niche within punk, while also just having some punk classics woven throughout the track listing. I mean, Astro Zombies is obviously a colossal jam from this record, but I'm a big fan of Vampira and All Hell Breaks Loose. I also think Nike A Go-Go is a good jam. That whole stretch of the record, I think, is pretty fucking choice. I think Night of the Living Dead and Skulls, again, just very on the nose, but very sort of essential, introducing the idea of misfits into the ether. It's a really good, compact little experience. The guys crafting together something like this right out the gate is just as on the nose and as straightforward as you can get before really giving people a taste of something else further on down the line. The fun musical sort of kaleidoscope Susie and the Banshees are crafting on A Kiss in the Dream House, I think, send this record off into the horizons in the choicest way. I love the hazy, uneasing build throughout Obsession. It really sort of, again, hits the hammer on the head when it comes to, like, crafting that sound with that mood. The wonky groove with its accordion that carries Circle, I think is super fucking awesome. And as far as, like, creating this really fun variety of melting pot of ideas, this is a really good iteration of that. You know, the swing and groove that carries Cocoon. You know, some of the other hazier guitars and ideas that crop up throughout this, I think, create this fun, vibrant experience for the listener. You can tell the band was very inspired sonically and lyrically as far as, like, doubling down on some fun shifts or, again, cementing the listener really well into the headspace that they were sonically trying to pull together. I think this is a fun... I think this is a group having fun, and that shows in the performances, and I think that that's what makes it even more of a great listen, because you can tell the band was just really trying to spread their wings in so many territories. And I think a lot of them stick the landing by and large. Now, when I'm talking about, like, more tangential and jazz-influenced city pop that I think slaps, For You by Tetsuro Yamashita is absolutely that. A record that, by and large, within pockets of city pop I've seen get some accolades, and I think is absolutely worth the hype. I think that its play with interludes and sonic motifs, I think, is awesome, and I think is executed pretty strongly. I think that some of the more abstract or, like, you know, cyclical but not necessarily hook-driven stuff like Hey Reporter, I think, sort of helps add some fun tangents to the sounds as well. I think this record is honestly pretty awesome, and I love that similar lushness that I talked about loving in Friday Magic, but utilized so very differently. I love the talent on display musically speaking, and I think that as far as, like, the production to help sell that utopic sort of sonic idea, this does so across the fucking board. Essential listening for the genre and the excursions I've done, IMO, and I think absolutely a staple. If we're talking, like, expressive, bold, but still pop-driven excellence, though, The Dreaming by Kate Bush creates this very unhinged sonic palette from jump, but I think brings the listener in with some of those good hooks just as quickly. I honestly think is a pretty awesome experience. I'm not all that familiar with Kate Bush either. In fact, this was more like, similarly to what I did with XTC with the last time, my excuse to sort of really dive into more of Kate Bush's material. But I think that this is a fucking awesome album. The vocal melody play on, like, Leave It Open is just cool as hell. But equally as so, the more emotional climaxes and the more impactful performances, I think, shine just as strongly as the more hook-centric stuff. With tracks like All the Love and the title track having these good, in some instances slower, but still grand crescendos that I think that they build to pretty amicably. I think, if anything, this gets me more satiated to do a deeper dive on Kate's stuff, because I really love the eccentric stuff that's on here, and I think is bold and flashy in all the right ways. Trying to find stability in punk was the mission statement of Milo Goes to College, and I think with how influential it would become in the punk scene like 10, 15 years later, it absolutely cemented its case with that. You know, it found this balance of punk edge with a catchier production style or, you know, more catchier songwriting, whether it be hooks or through some of the, you know, components that the band was working with. The bass on here is fucking choice. I mean, My Age feels like quintessential punk to some degree, as far as, like, being the foundation with which groups like Green Day and NoFX, you know, and even Blink-182 would, like, sprout from. Does it have writing that may not have aged the best? Absolutely, and I would say that even The Misfits' Walk Among Us would be a record that very much embodies not aging well in some regards. One would argue it would bleed into where some of the scene went to as a whole. Heyo! Buck against the bucking that punk was sort of going through in the early 80s. You know, especially with tracks like, I mean, I'm Not a Punk, or on Suburban Home, which are talking about, you know, stability. You know, you wanting to be non-classified in spite of being pigeonholed within your lane. I don't know. I think there's absolutely a through line many would have made and would make with the Descendants to its influence, and I think that as far as, like, being that kind of record, it absolutely is. I think that it's still a razor-sharp listen, and I think that, like, a lot of the musical components, I think, still hold up as a whole. It was Judas Priest in their heyday writing some of the best metal to come out of the scene in a year that just happened to also have some other colossal classics. I mean, this record has that bombast and swagger from the jump that electrifies, with bangers like Electric Eye and the title track, you know, catchy-ass thumpers like You've Got Another Thing Coming help pivot the groove so excellently. This record is championed as easily one of the best of their discography, and I'd be hard-pressed to at least not put it in my top 3. It is everything that is quintessential with this band during an era where they were just firing off on all cylinders. I love this record. It's been a classic in my eyes for decades at this point, and I think that it is one of the most quintessential 80s British heavy metal releases to drop during its era. Now you may be wondering, with all that praise, what beat it in the top 10? How did it land in the 10th spot? Well, one of my favorite bands' records from that year didn't even crack the top 5. 1982, for as much as I said up at the top, it's not my favorite year, it's still got some, like, really essential shit. Signals is a great synth-era Rush record, though, and I think is kind of underrated in some regards. Yeah, Subdivisions may not be the best single they've dropped, but I mean, the bass work on the Analog Kid, the way that they flipped their own sort of that era grooviness on Digital Man, too. I really love the both synthy and more their style grooves throughout tracks like The Weapon and New World Man. I love the lyrical building on New World Man. This record still strikes some strong horizons within the band's, you know, discography, and while it may not be my favorite record of theirs, I don't even think it cracked my top 10 in their discography, if memory serves me correctly, but it's still a strong showing from them, and I still think has some essential Rush deep cuts woven throughout its track listing.
Her name is Rio and she dances on the sand.
Records like Duran Duran's sophomore explosion, Rio, which had some of the best singles from the 80s permeating throughout its track listing, like the electrifying opener Rio, or the primal Hungry Like the Wolf. It's got its own moodiness too, like The Chauffeur, which I'll admit I prefer the Deftones version to. I think still creates some sidesteps within the band's catalog that I think expanded on and further, you know, pushed their own proverbial sonic boundaries through the stratosphere in all of the right ways. You know, there's a reason why it's championed as one of the best synth records of the 80s, and it's because it has equal balance hook and atmosphere just treading around so beautifully. I think this record is magnificent, and I think, again, absolutely worth the accolades it's had throughout the decades.
In her wing for answer.
When it comes to singer-songwriter-driven stuff and, you know, creating a mood and really writing within a broader sonic concept, records like Nebraska are the benchmarks I feel like artists should reach for. You know, there's a reason why they're creating a biopic about the creative process of this record, and it's because there's an emotional strength to this that has this permeating sense of depression and sadness coded throughout its balladry and sort of haunting ideas that I think Bruce and the group just pull together magnificently. Self-fulfilled bleakness that feels sort of brought out on tracks like Used Car or even on State Trooper to some degree. There's a darkness throughout this record that I think is more and more strong the more that the record sits with you. You know, I've never really heralded Bruce Springsteen's songwriting all that highly, but I think that records like Nebraska really showcase why he has been a respected songwriter to some capacity. And as far as, like, stripping a lot of the subtext that was seen in some of the more popular-driven stuff, I think that this does so masterfully. This is very much an album experience that I think that he crafts, that I think that they crafted so meticulously and so intimately. I like... This is the type of sad record that I appreciate because of the bleakness behind it, the sort of acceptance in some, you know, some of the deeper pockets that I think send that sadness further home that I just really admire in a record like Nebraska. As far as creating this razor-sharp punk record that has some really cool deviations, Bad Brains' debut is honestly up there for one of my favorites within the genre, and it's because I love their aggressive, just throat-grabbing tracks as much as I like the laid-back jams, and I think that the laid-back jams only enrich some of the lyrical tapestries that they're, you know, that they're pulling together in the best ways. I mean, I absolutely love Leaving Babylon. I think it might be my favorite, more laid-back tangent on here, but it's a point where that emotion gets sent over the edge in the best way possible. I mean, don't get me wrong. I like Band in DC. I think it's rugged. I think its bass is just super sick. I love the aggression behind that track. You know, I absolutely love Attitude. I think that it's a punk classic. But I think that the cocktail that Bad Brains pulls together on here is the true magic at the core of this experience. And I think is incredible. And I think is absolutely a punk classic across the board. I've had a couple records that I would call like niche punk classics. As far as like ubiquitous punk classics, Bad Brains' debut is absolutely that. I think that it is all of the bite and attitude that I love from punk, but in just this really nice concentrated dose that breaks that up in some choice and well-articulated ways. It's Thriller. It's one of the most highly regarded and most successful pop albums of all time. I'm sure some people are even mad it's just number 5 on my list. But as far as, like, the grand 5 best albums of 82, in my opinion, this is absolutely where it lands. And it's not just because I'm not a big fan of The Girl Is Mine. I appreciate the meticulousness that went through sequencing a record like this because it shines in so many great ways. Even if I'm not big on The Girl Is Mine, there are so many quintessential, like, best of all time pop albums within a pop, moments within a pop album, all on this record. I mean, you got Wanna Be Startin' Something, which, I mean, kicks the record off beautifully. Thriller is the Halloween pop jam. It got Vincent Price rapping in the bridge saying y'all's neighborhood. PYT, synth funk jam. I mean, it's got its good lovey moments that Michael Jackson taps into so well, but it's also just got some good groovy moments, like Billie Jean obviously Beat It. Like, this is a record that a lot of people love. I'm just also one of those. I just happen to put it at number 5 in my best albums of 82 list.
So tonight I'm gonna party like it's 1999.
In the battle of MJ versus Prince, while as a kid, I would have been Mr. MJ. As I got older, I just fell more and more in love with Prince. And 1999 may not be my favorite Prince album. It's absolutely that record, man. As far as, again, creating some quintessential pop, 80s pop smashes. It's got that 1-2 punch of the title track and Little Red Corvette right out the fucking gate. It's got some great extended jams like Let's Pretend We're Married or on Automatic, which further showcases Prince's tenacity to creating these engaging, longer pieces that balance some catchy ideas with some fun sonic tangents. I don't know, this record is a masterpiece in pop craftsmanship. While neither it or Thriller may be my favorite records in their respective artists' discographies, 1999 absolutely is also that fucking album. And I'm sure some people are equally as upset that it's not my number 1, but it's at least my number 4 in my top 5, right? Dead Kennedys are arguably my favorite punk band, if not definitely in my top 3. And I've got a lot of love for Fresh Fruit Fried Vegetables. It is the only album of theirs I do own on vinyl. I'd love to have their collective discography. But I think Plastic Surgery Disasters follows that up in a way that ramps up some of that macabre eccentricity, but also doubles down on that punk aggression in a way that I think is purely excellent. I love the bookending of these chaotic interludes to sort of bring the listener in to the frenzied mind state that the lyrics sort of have generating throughout their core. You know, the paranoia on Government Flu, the outright anarchy on Buzz Bomb, the incredible bass-driven Halloween. There's classics on here across the board. The way that while they get dark and sort of lurching throughout the back end, they find a way to bring it back around with some good kick-ups and madness and energy by its end with Dead End and Moon Over Marin. I think this is an expertly crafted follow-up that I think is a great expansion on their energy in ways that I think are just as essential and classic as their debut.
Catching halos on the moon.
Bands writing amidst tension and turmoil can sometimes be a disastrous experience, but Pornography stands as this uneasy listen because the band channels that so harmoniously in this moody but engaging listen that has the same kind of dreary haziness that one may have come to them for up to this point, through moments like The Hanging Garden and A Strange Day. But I really love some of the bass-led treading, like on Short Term Effect as well, and I think that those moments especially really bring the listener in strongly. I adore The Cure as a whole, and again, it may not be my favorite record by that particular band, but as far as pulling together this great expression of conflict, I think that I've seen bands, especially at this point in their career, when they're still, like, they're taking off and they're catching their scene, but they're not even, like, at the points that they would reach. It's nice to see that in those make-or-break potential moments for the band, they really pulled together some truly fantastic jams. The lumberingness on Cold, I think, is haunting and beautiful in all the best ways possible. There's a lot of really good Cure cuts on here that I think, again, if anything, push their boundaries even farther and would help them see their greatness by this record's end. Because while, again, I think that they were cooking some good stuff on records like Faith and on records before this, this was a good pivotal point for them, and I think that they stuck the landing magnificently. 666, the number of the beast. record by Iron Maiden, but Number of the Beast is essential 80s metal listening, in my opinion. I mean, I talked about that in my discography review. I've done, like, microdactyls on this. I've talked about Number of the Beast a couple times on the internet, and I still helm this as a fantastic introduction to Bruce Dickinson into the band's sound. I think that them leaning into his belting abilities, or at least teasing that in some moments, like on Hallowed Be Thy Name, and obviously on the title track and Run to the Hills, would get further nurtured out in their career in ways that I think are a little stronger. But as far as, like, introducing him and showing their immediate chemistry as a band, this does so masterfully. I think that this is a, you know, again, broadly accepted as classic essential metal record, and I very much parrot a lot of those opinions as I have in the past. I think that the production is great. I think that the unity here is choice. Again, Steve Harris, his bass play is unmatched, and I think he writes some really good stuff on here. But I think that as far as, like, broadening their sonic boundaries with Dickinson, I think that they did so masterfully on Number of the Beast. And those are my favorite records from 1982. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comments down below. If you like this video, give it a like. If you want to see more, consider subscribing. I drop 2 to 4 vids a week depending on what I've got going on. Thank you so very much for watching. I'm going to go. I've been Viral Rack. You guys have good days, lots of situations, and I'll see you another day.